together with the climate week to build further momentum for actions. And also, more importantly, we are moving towards the COP Conference of Parties 26, Glasgow, of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is a multilateral climate talks to be taking place in the coming November. So because majority of audiences joining us today basically represent the global development community from South-South Cooperation, Triangle Cooperation, and not necessarily the climate expert community per se. So let me take this opportunity to frame this session by first giving you sort of context to set a scene, and by walking you through 5 essential highlights happening this year. And then later on move to the conversation with the distinguished panelists joining us today. And for the logistical note, I'm informed by the organizers' side that we need to prepare the summary for the session to reporting back to the plenary after the event. So may I propose to end the session perhaps around 10 minutes earlier. So we may break out around 11:20-ish, and you can take a break for 10 minutes and come back to the plenary later on. And also for the sake of hearing the responses and reflections from panelists clearly, may I propose to once again to confirm you are muted to make sure that you know all the noises are gone. So without further ado, so let's start. So the 5 essential highlights as a context. Well, the first highlight is essentially the expectation for upcoming COP26. The central theme of COP26 is ultimately to reach an inclusive, balanced, and packaged agreement to finalize so-called Paris rulebook and to guide implementation actions by respective parties or countries. And to achieve this, we need to close discussion on some pending items, such as the treatment of market mechanism, as we phrase it as Article 6 negotiation, and some formatting issue of transparency, the finance, among others. So this is where we stand now and what we anticipated to see happening in upcoming Glasgow. And second highlight is this year of 2021 marks the submission of the updated NDC, the Nationally Determined Contribution, as the renewed commitment of ambition towards 2030 put forth by all the countries. And as far as I understand, the synthesis report of this updated NDCs are now under preparation by the Convention Secretariat to be threshed out later this month. And the positive side of this updated NDC is that we see the gradual progression of the ambition or improvement in the contents of the NDC, including the coverage of the wider economic sectors, so forth. However, the downside is that even the accumulation of this ambition among the updated NDC still fall short of the ambition range to be consistent with the global emission pathway with the temperature target we aspire to achieve. The third highlight is that this climate talk in Glasgow not only talk about the midterm range target, which is 2030 target under NDC, but also tap on the longer term ambition through the so-called long-term strategy to achieve net zero global emission towards the latter half of the century to be on track with the temperature target. And the fourth highlight is the update in the climate science. Just last month, IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, released its 6th assessment report of Working Group 1 of physical science basis to provide the most recent scientific observation and concluded that it is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. And our influence to the system is already affecting many weather and climate extremes in every region across the globe. And this influence has warmed the climate at the rate that is unprecedented in at least the last 2 millennia. So perhaps you can relate this observation with extreme weather events or happening this year, which not only affected the global south, but also in global north as well, including the flash floods that are sweeping through the Europe earlier this year, and also extended wildfires and Category 4 hurricanes just hitting the North America all the way to Northeast, all causing losses and damages to properties and livelihood. So now its urgency matters to all. And last but not least, the fifth highlight is despite we face compounded challenges from climate change and pandemic altogether, we continue to see sort of expansion of renewable energy development and also market expansion, as well as innovation in mobility sector, for example, towards electrification. So which all contribute to greening the development as a whole. So these to present opportunity during this very difficult time. So with those highlights in mind, what I'd like to see tease out throughout this session is firstly, how prepared are the regions and countries to move forward to align with the Paris Agreement. And at the same time, how countries and regions shift its development pathway towards greener direction to enhance sustainability as a whole. And mostly, and what are the roles of the regional organizations to facilitate or catalyze, as we say, climate actions, particularly in the context of South-South cooperation. And to respond to those questions, we are joined by four distinguished panelists across different regions joining today. Let me take my moderator's privilege to make a round of introduction first. The first panelist is Ambassador Solomala from PIDF, the Pacific Island Development Forum, serving as Secretary General. And Ambassador Mala is experienced a trained diplomat to the Republic of Fiji, with his service extending for more than last 2 decades, including his function being a permanent secretary, MOFA, High Commissioner to the UK, and Ambassador to the USA, among others. Very good morning, Ambassador. And the second panelist is Dr. Mahmood Rahman from SASEP, South Asia Cooperative Environmental Program. Dr. Rahman is serving as the Director General of SASEP. Prior to joining the current organization, he's been serving as a civil servant of People's Republic of Bangladesh in 1998 and has performed duties in different capacities. And he has holds a PhD in agroforestry and environment. And welcome to session, Dr. Rahman. I'll get back to you later. And third panelist, Mr. Yosefa Mayaba from SGAP, serving as the head of the sub-regional office from the Pacific since 2008. And prior to joining the office, Mr. Mayaba has been assuming his role as Secretary for Foreign Affairs at Trade of Nauru. And he also served as Deputy Secretary General of the Pacific Islands Forum, PIF, from 1999 up to 2007. So very good morning, Mr. Mayaba. Last but not least, the fourth panelist, we have Ms. Ofa Masi Kaisami, if I pronounce your name correctly, from SPREP, South Pacific Regional Environmental Program, currently serving as the manager of the Pacific Climate Change Center, PCCC, to operationalize the Center of Excellence for fostering capacity building climate change to the Pacific region. Talofa, and welcome, Ms. Ofa. Okay, so I would like to start with Ambassador Mala, PIDF. Good morning. Ambassador, as a trained diplomat, I'm sure you have witnessed the evolution of climate change and national responses by the Pacific countries progressing over time. And as you are sitting as in the regional forum PIDF, I have a 2 set of questions for you to start with. So first set of question is, can you briefly tell us the role of PIDF and how the forum contributes to supporting the climate actions in the region that you are oversighting? And second set of questions being, what is your assessment of the key challenges and opportunities that you see in addressing climate change? So Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator, fellow speakers, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon from the Pacific. I wish to thank you, Nosh, and the organizers for this virtual event and for the invitation to participate. And I'm delighted to be given this opportunity. And if you allow me, I will get to the answers to your questions in my statement. Thank you. Over the past year, because of the closure of the international borders due to COVID-19 travel restrictions, we have been following with interest the many virtual conferences and webinars of post-COVID-19 recoveries. And in nearly all of the early virtual interactions, the discussions focus primarily on public health component of building back better post-COVID-19, particularly on diverting development funds to strengthening public health infrastructure. the development of a vaccine and its related health protocols like masking, social distancing, and so on. While this is understandable given the quick pace at which the virus was spreading across the globe, it had the effect of diverting attention and financing away from the global climate action commitments made in recent COPs. Hopefully, this is just a momentary lapse, and the current discussions and focus on green recovery, green growth, and green economy will again realign the responses to these two existential threats to the point of convergence. For those of us in this green space or advocating for the mainstreaming of green economic principles pre-COVID-19, we cannot agree more. But now with COVID, it needs to be scaled up and fast-tracked if it is to have any meaningful impact in reducing global warming whilst building robust economies and strengthening resilient communities. As you highlighted, the most recent IPCC report is a stark reminder that the global community cannot afford to drop the ball on climate action. If anything, we need to redouble our effort in rolling out climate action programs to reduce carbon emission, reverse global warming, and build resilient communities. Our Pacific leaders have made it clear in their pronouncement on the PIDF platform and other regional meetings that they will maintain and double down as a matter of development priority the focus on the devastating impacts of climate change. We cannot afford to save ourselves from the pandemic and lose our island homes to climate change. They will not relent from reminding the global community of this fact and are going to hold all countries to the commitments they have made on the Paris Agreement, both in terms of emission reductions and financial pledges to help developing countries, particularly seeds, to mitigate and adapt to the devastating impact of climate change. PIDF's role in supporting the Paris Agreement has been a historical one that is imprinted on the organization's DNA. The Suva Declaration on Climate Change was born out of our third Pacific Island Development Forum Leaders Summit in 2015 and formed the crux of the position PSEEDS took to the Paris COP. And this included the key elements that PSEEDS and the Alliance of Small Island States pursued throughout the negotiations, particularly the limits to the global average temperature to below 1.5 degrees Celsius, and for a legally binding agreement, and to some extent establishment of a standalone loss and damage mechanism. Another was the endorsement of the 19 Bay Declaration on the PIDF platform. The reference to climate crisis, for example, was first adopted at the 2019 Leaders Summit. And it makes clear the collective view of Pacific leaders that the current scale of the climate crisis calls for urgent action to phase out coal and other fossil fuels and encourage bigger nations to invest in greener and renewable energy sources. So for us, the advocacy role on the PIDF platform is very important for capitalizing and amplifying Pacific Island voices on these issues of the importance of climate change. And two examples of PIDF's ongoing efforts, both for decarbonization and resilience building, are clearly exhibited in two projects currently being rolled out in our member states. The first is the solarizations of head of states Pacific leaders' residences to promote renewable energy and other renewable energy technologies in member countries, and to strengthen the advocacy of our leaders in walking the talk in reducing carbon emissions despite our minuscule carbon footprint. The second project is the capacity building to strengthen sustainable implementation of renewable energy. And the goal of this project is to contribute to increased energy access and reduction of carbon emissions through sustainable use of natural resources. And this is being rolled out in Fiji, Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, and Papua New Guinea. And like all other small island states, climate change and sea level rise are critical development challenges that significantly impacts the type and cost of sustainable development strategy that is adopted for economic growth and community resilience. The reference to climate change crisis here, adopted by PIDF members in 2019, speaks volumes of the urgencies we in the Pacific view the need to address climate action now with measurable and tangible targets. Regional organizations working in this space are assisting Pacific Island countries to achieving carbon neutrality. At PIDF, our focus is on assisting our member countries transition to blue-green economies by engaging the private sector and civil society stakeholders, particularly in the area of electricity production. Because PICs are located far from the major source of markets for fossil fuels and other production centers. And this has a spiraling effect on the cost of services and other commodities manufactured locally. Unfortunately for the Pacific Islands, electricity production accounts for roughly 40% of petroleum used in the region. And the long-term dependence on diesel generation has meant that the cost of electricity has remained among the highest in the world. That is at 20 to 30 US cents per kilowatt hours. So pursuing carbon neutrality also makes a lot of socio-economic sense for the Pacific. The cost of renewable energy technology and materials are also now affordable, particularly with China's entry into the renewable energy market. And in a region with an abundance of sunshine, the Pacific has a lot of reliable sources of renewable energy, the sun, the ocean, and wind. As a way forward, therefore, solar energy is a model renewable energy technology that can be deployed on and off-grid, and its small standalone system offers the potential to preempt a shift from privatization and centralization, which is usually associated with fossil fuels energy production, to a more decentralized and community-owned assets. And some of the practical challenges we face in the region in meeting climate action targets, as identified from our consultation, informal and formal, include one, the lack of innovative funding support from the international community for adaptation solutions in building island resilience, the lack of support for the inclusion of ocean-based conservation activities into the climate action agenda, the lack of innovative national policies resulting in the gap between policy development and implementation, the lack of effective legal and regulatory structures to promote and incentivize green growth economies, and so on. And one of the ways of addressing the above-mentioned challenges is to feed the views of the private sector and civil society through our Talanoa programs or informal discussion into the policy formulation process at the national level. If the private sector is to be the engine of green economic growth, then their voice needs to inform the national policy formulation process. From our own engagement with the private sector and civil societies on the PIDF platform, we know that a lot of economies in the Pacific Island region is still skewed in favor of a fossil fuel industry and related businesses. From tax incentives to tariffs, from direct government funding support to accessible and competitive commercial loans, the lack of support to green growth incentives in clean energy, transport, and so on is glaring. However, some green shoots are beginning to show, and this demonstrates that the multi-stakeholder and the whole of society approach we are promoting to accelerate climate action in green growth is finding some traction. We are constantly encouraging our partners in the green growth space, particularly those in the private sector and civil society, that they need to raise the level of their engagement with the governments to fast-track the changes needed in current policies and legislation, and to ensure the momentum coming out of the commitments to the climate action programs is not lost. Yes, there are obvious green economic opportunities out there in progressive climate action initiatives in the Pacific, particularly through the platform of South-South and Triangular Cooperation. We at the PIDF recognize the principles of South-South cooperation in sustaining the implementation of green growth principles and the SDGs in the Pacific Islands, because it brings in not only relevant and comparable expertise and experiences, but importantly, in my view, fostering a strong participatory approach to development. South-South and Triangular Cooperation also offers a strong platform for collaboration and exchanges among countries of the South, particularly in the area of sustainable development. Most countries in the global South, especially in the Asia-Pacific region, share a lot of development challenges in the political, economic, cultural, environment, and technical domains. These similarities in challenges make these countries ideal partners for obvious reasons, not the least of which is the exchange of comparable best practices, knowledge, development experiences, and technical expertise. One of the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic is forcing development partners to develop and use local expertise rather than external consultants. This is good news for the sustainability of projects going forward. We at the PIDF are already convening online training, online workshops, and seminars to build capacities at the national level in the areas of green blue economies and renewable energy. This would not have been possible during normal time. Therefore, the restrictions placed on travel can help develop technical capacities at the national level. On green development, the COVID-19 pandemic has of course shown us how vulnerable the global community is to new and transmissible viruses. The very progress we have achieved in the areas of transport and communication has become vectors for the spread of diseases. Understandably, because of COVID-19 the last 2 years, there has been delays in the implementation of agreed climate action programs committed to by the global community of the UNFCCC, particularly financial pledges to the global climate funds that is aimed at assisting developing countries address the impacts of climate change. Countries began prioritizing COVID-19 responses in their national budgets over climate action programs. There is therefore a need to seriously consider our responses to the COVID-19 pandemic in the same strategy adopted for climate change. For in spite one being a public health crisis and the other an environmental crisis, they both pose the same serious threats of our continuing existence on this planet. They both impact our economies, environment, and communities badly, but they can also be addressed by adopting green growth, sustainable development principles that aim to build resilient and sustainable economies and communities. In conclusion, therefore, Mr. Moderator, I want to underline that COVID-19 response should not be at the expense of climate action programs. They can complement each other. In fact, there is an opportunity to redesign legislations and develop policies to address the climate change crisis and structure a transition to a green economy during and after the pandemic. I thank you for your indulgence.
Well, thank you very much, Ambassador, for quite comprehensive reflections, I think, which covered most of the questions I am going to ask to other panelists. And I take several takeaways, very important takeaways. I think, first of all, as you mentioned, the response to COVID and climate change will not be sort of mutually exclusive. And the response to pandemic is not an excuse to inaction in climate change. And that's clear as we understand. At the same time, you mentioned existential threat of the impact of climate change to the most Pacific Island. And I'm personally associate with your concerns because I started my career in the low-lying atoll and Pacific as well. So I know what you mean. And also, in terms of the pivotal role that the regional organization like PADF plays, advocacy role that's quite important to build the political momentum, and they have a shared view among the leaders in the region, and that's quite important message. And as well as the gaps that you mentioned, the several gaps you mentioned in terms of policy, the incentives particular, also inclusiveness of the actors like private sectors and CSO. That's something that we can continue discussing how that can be addressed. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your intervention. And the next, I'd like to move on to the next panelist, Dr. Rahman from SASEP. All right, Dr. Rahman, are you there? So you're representing the regional environmental program in South Asia. And in view of the size of economy and population, there's no doubt that South Asia is one of the regions driving global economic growth as well. And could you tell us how is climate change perceived within a SASEP community as agenda, and how your organization contributes to catalyze action by member states? And again, second set of questions being, in your regions and in your assessment, what are the key challenges and opportunities? Dr. Rahman, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, dear moderator. I'd like to go to the share screen, as it is a very important program organized by South-South, even Southside Corporation. And is it okay? Can we share the?
Yes, please. Go ahead. Can the Secretariat help Dr. Rahman? Please?
Yes, come here. Share the screen. Okay, thank you very much, distinguished panelists, dear moderator. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcoming you here at Sakib's presentation regarding climate change and green development in South Asia region. Actually, SAKIB is an intergovernmental organization established in 1982 by the government of South Asia to promote and support protection, management, and enhancement of the environment in the region. SAKIB member countries are Afghanistan, Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Maldives, Nepal, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka. And the main vision of SAKIB, a healthy environment, resilient society, and environmental prosperity for the present and future generation. So as you asked very early that actually what is the role of SAKIB in catalyzing climate change or climate action, what SAKIB is doing in South Asia region. So if I go one by one, you could see that since our establishment in the year 1982, SAKIB has placed significant operational emphasis on promoting and supporting the protection and management of environment in South Asia region. Climate change is one of the main areas we are focusing on. Then I like to tell about you see that the importance of our regional works was recognized when in 1988, the Malay Declaration on Control on Prevention of Air Pollution and its like transboundary effect for South Asia was adopted by the Ministers of Environment at the 7th Governing Council meeting of SAKIB. In this meeting, the number of states reaffirmed their commitment to tackling the transboundary air pollution together. The Malay Declaration is the only intergovernmental agreement on environment which covers all South Asian countries. Then I'd like to draw your attention towards the virtual workshop. What SAKIB in partnership with the UNFCCC organized a virtual training on preparation and submission process of updated NDC, the cut-wise guidance of NDC to its member countries. The aim of this training was to enhance the technical capacity of SAKIB member states in their preparation and updated NDC in 2020 in line with further guidance for relevant for the preparation and communication of NDCs. SAKIB also initiated another program with the Asian Development Bank, jointly organized a webinar entitled Leveraging NDC in COVID-19 Recovery in South Asia Countries on last February. This regional webinar, it's aimed to enhancing the understanding of the twin challenges of climate changes and COVID-19, as well as the opportunity of pursuing low carbon and climate resilient recovery. This year on March, SAKIB and the World Bank jointly organized the South Asia Regional Workshop on Ambient Air Pollution and Public Health. A World Bank regional flagship study, it is departed to emphasize the need of strengthening national policy and measures to reduce air pollution and mitigation the adverse effect of air pollution on human health across the region. And finally, regarding an upcoming event, I like to draw your attention that very importantly, we wish to organize a side event during the upcoming COP26 under the theme, Good Practice in NDC, Update Process, Implementation and Nitrogen Climate Opportunity in South Asia, Challenges and Lesson Learned. The proposed side event would be highlight the importance of NDC updated process and will be ideal platform for SAKIB member states to share their good practice, exchange their experience in the NDC updated process and challenges in the NDC implementation. Moreover, SAKIB in partnership with ADB is planning to organize a virtual training workshop on impact evaluation and MRV capacity building towards end of this year. Actually, these all the things SAKIB is catalyzing in climate action. Now I like to go towards my next slide as you asked that, what is the state of planning towards carbon neutrality in South Asia? The transformation of South Asia to greener resilient economies would touch 1.5 billion people in a region with already many developing needs. The financing needs for achieving a successful mitigation plan in the region are large and conditional on extensive support and assistance from the international community, as shown in South Asia NDC's targets, which also incorporate the general pledge of assistance by developed countries. Within the SACEP region, we are happy to mention that 5 of our 8 member states have already submitted their updated NDC with complete information and detail on ambition and targets as compared with their previous submission. As you told that what the challenges we are now facing here in the South Asia region, contacting these sort of businesses, especially for the climate change aspects, our member states, what's the challenges we are now facing? There are so many challenges, no doubt. In generally, I like to discuss, as time constraint is there, I will be just highlighting main points here, few challenges like, especially 4 challenges I like to mention. It's development challenges, technology challenges, policy challenges, and also the environmental challenges we're now facing here. And as a pioneer regional organization, SACEP is working with its member countries on a number of fronts to advance the implementation of their NDCs, such as, now I like to mention one by one, where we are now assisting. Exchange of best practice of views related to NDC implementation planning, including linkages to SDG processes. We have the joint capacity building program. We have the identifying concrete opportunity for action in translating NDCs into actionable projects. Leveraging financial flow, including private sector engagement in the context of NDC implementation. And SACEP will remain committed to continue to work with our member countries as well as with the all development partners who remain steadfast on their obligation under the Paris Agreement. Dear participants, I like to draw your kind attention towards the South Asia regional opportunities. Actually, what opportunity have presently existing in South Asia? We know each risk posed by climate change also present on opportunity. Adaptation and mitigation measures intended to address the impact of climate change require significant investment to make the South Asia economy more resilient. Creating markets for climate resilient infrastructure, climate smart agriculture, renewable energy, sustainable transport, industry energy efficiency, and green and resilient building, among other, can present significant investment opportunity. I like to mention one example related to the energy sector in India can be, I think, very much relevant and mentionable. The Indian government is working to address the country's growing air pollution problem. The urgent priority, along with the recognition that there is a growing risk of stranded assets as the world transition to a low carbon future, has influenced the Indian government's decision to stop building coal plant after 2022. The Energy and Resources Institute found that if the right policy are in place and the cost of renewable energy continued to fall at the same rate, India could phase out coal completely by 2050. The growth in renewable energy is also creating jobs in India, which is very much a mentionable amount. Near about 621,000 people employed directly or indirectly in the sector in the year 2016. Dear colleagues, now I'd like to go towards your next question regarding the green development in the South Asia region. As I told you earlier, that the transition to a green economy requires easy access to market and resources, among other things. This will not be possible without regional integration at the political, business, knowledge, and technological level. South Asian countries have to sign treaties that improve allocation and distribution of resources in the region. The sharing of common borders and facing the same challenges pertaining to climate change is a good enough reason for these countries to share their best practices with respect to policies, schemes, and programs, and to come together to think on the lines of green economy projects that build on energy interconnection, renewable energy initiatives, and research and innovation networks. Some successful interventions such as Nepal's environmental community-based convention model and Bhutan measures. Definitely Bhutan measures for promoting a green economy through intervention, promotional global national happiness, ecosystem, etc. can be replicated by partner nations. And SAKIP is trying to implement within their member states to follow Bhutanese model, I think. But as even better way to facilitate this is to encourage member states to unite, together to form common interest hubs consisting academician, subject matter experts, researchers, to look into sector-wise environmental concerns. Most importantly, the 2020, we have this, the SAKIP strategy, 2030 strategy we have highlights under its goal number 5 on strengthening low emission development, improve resources efficiencies for transition to an inclusive green economy and foster sustainable and healthy lifestyle. In conclusion of my speech, what I'd like to include, Bangladesh is also striving in this situation, and they are also trying to develop their connectivity, decreasing their fossil fuel using, rather they are increasing all the renewable energy they are now turned out. And a few days earlier, they have submitted their NDCs, the latest version, and they have already focused all the aspects, areas where actually climate change is very important and importantly can play the role. So with this, dear moderator, I like to conclude. Thanks for your patience hearing. If there is any question I'd like to address, and that will be much more comfortable for me, as there is a formal presentation, I think, from SAKIP. And SAKIP is doing for the South Asia region and always committed doing for the member states with the development partners, thinking all together. And SAKIP always believe if we could do something for the region in a holistic manner for the climate change aspects, it will be significant, remarkable, and best practice for us. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Rahman, again, for your very comprehensive reflections of the items that to be covered in this session. And in particular, start with congratulating your government's submission of the NDC update. And that certainly adds up to the ambition that is required in the upcoming Glasgow meeting. And I think you have highlighted very important points, once again, in terms of the role of the regional organization at SAKIP, perhaps the collective sort of political momentum formulation through the declaration and strategy formulation, as well as you are playing a pivotal role in sensitizing and also outreaching the topics in collaboration with other partners, including multilateral financing institutions. And we would love to see your corporate engagement through side events as well. And in terms of the challenges, yes, we acknowledge that the challenges are multifaceted. It's not very simple. It's a combination of policy, technology, and the users, the finances that needs to be addressed in the same time. However, the opportunity you presented is quite relevant, I think, to all of us. Perhaps you're taking a very bright side of, yes, this is a market opportunity for market creation and particularly job creation as well. So that's something that we need to see happening. And in terms of the green development, yes, the access to the resources is quite crucial. And at the same time, because you mentioned about the transboundary air pollution issue, I think you raised a very important point that the climate change is not just simple actions. Perhaps we need to sort of integrate looking at the environmental co-benefit of climate actions or vice versa, because some actions actually not only addresses the climate impacts, but at the same time to address the more dire health concerns from the air pollution as well, which is quite imminent to the health issue in the region as well. So I think that's something we need to take into account. Thank you very much. And Dr. Rahman, may I ask you to turn down the slide so that we can come back to the next. All right, excellent. Thank you, Dr. Rahman. All right, so moving on to the next panelist. So we have Mr. Josefa Mayava. So Mr. Mayava, as the head of the SCAP sub-regional office in the Pacific, so I'd like to hear from you the UN perspective. So could you share with us the role of SCAP and activities related to climate change in your region? And also, again, your reflection on the challenges and opportunities that you see. So Mr. Mayava, you have a floor.
Thank you very much. In the interest of time, all protocol observed. Distinguished participants, in response to the question that have been raised, I wish to start by noting an important role of UN SCAP in the Pacific, which is that of facilitating the participation of Pacific small island developing states in intergovernmental meetings like the SCAP Commission and in UN-led processes, like in the 2030 Agenda and even in the Paris Agreement. SCAP is also guided in the Pacific by the priorities of the Pacific leaders and governments. And early last month, the Pacific Islands Forum leaders again called climate change the single greatest existential threat facing the Pacific Islands, by insisting that COVID-19 responses must not delay global climate actions. Global climate actions, we need to be clear that they're not really saying that must not delay climate actions. Is it global climate action? Because that's where the problem is, and that's where the solution is in the major emitters and therefore should prioritize climate smart recovery investments consistent with low emission pathways. They also agree on the need to strengthen through regional approaches, and that's an opportunity for the Office of South Cooperation and for the staff. The participation countries 26 and up. Hello? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
In his statement on the latest IPCC Working Group 1 report, the Secretary General, who likened the report to a code red alert for humankind, all humankind. Right? So the problem is not just for the Pacific, not the threat is just for the Pacific, it's for all humankind. And said that COVID-19 spending must be aligned with the goals of the Paris Agreement. Regarding the IPCC report findings, of greatest concerns to the Pacific are first, sea level rise, already irreversible, will rise another 10 centimeters if warming passes 1.5 and approaches the 2-degree mark, risking lives of millions and the survival of many islands. Second, coral reefs, which are already starting to disappear, will be wiped out completely. And third, warming oceans and acidity will eliminate fisheries and livelihoods for millions of people. So there is a clear economic and moral imperative, says the UN Secretary General. And I make this point very, very clear because the reference to moral imperative gives us an insight into what may be needed in this challenge or in this fight against climate change. So the economic and moral imperative that the Secretary General refers to is to protect the lives and livelihoods of those on the front lines of and who have contributed the least to the climate crisis, and to upscale adaptation and resilience finance from the 21% of total climate funds at the moment to at least 50%. So what needs to be done to keep the 1.5 degrees target of the Paris Agreement within reach? The list is extremely daunting, but still doable according to the IPCC report, albeit with a much shorter time frame than previously thought. Much shorter time frame, and that's the key word. For example, reducing CO2 emissions by 45% from the 2010 levels by 2030. Renewable energy to provide up to 85% of global electricity by 2050. Coal to be phased out before mid-century and no more coal plants after 2019, no new coal plants after 2021. Up to 7 million square kilometer of land needed for energy crops. That's about little less than the size of Australia. And achieve global net zero emissions by 2050. The real challenge, however, is that there is no easy or painless response option available. And there seems to be a great deal of need to focus more on the ethical and moral dimensions of the challenge instead of ignoring them. That said, the Pacific is to be congratulated for moving to protect what they have and prepare for what is to come. For example, in the face of irreversible sea level rise, Pacific leaders have recently issued a declaration of their maritime boundaries in perpetuity. Under the Pacific Climate Change Migration and Human Security Program, the Pacific countries are working with the International Organization for Migration, IOM, ESCAP, OHCHR, ILO, the Pacific Islands Forum Secretariat, SPRED, and others towards a regional framework for managing climate mobility, whether it's related to migration, displacement, or relocation. ESCAP is also contributing to the integrated and sustainable management of the Pacific Ocean through, for example, the development of ocean accounts and nature-based solutions in partnerships with UN agencies and sub-regional organizations. Another example of the ESCAP's catalytic convening role is the Pacific Forum for Sustainable Development, which last year featured a session on South-South cooperation, and which will consider in November this year other areas of work of ESCAP and its Pacific partners. For example, there will be a consideration of the promotion of COVID-19 recovery and sustainable development in the context of the IPCC report and the outcome of the COP26. Second, there will be a consideration of how to promote inclusive and green development, including the role of social protection in resilience building. Third, there will be a consideration of how to promote cooperation in sustainable maritime transport, connectivity, trade, and energy. And fourth, consideration of how to support work on innovative green financing instruments, including debt for nature swaps, SDG financing, and access to climate adaptation funds. The Pacific Forum for Sustainable Development will then provide a report to the Asia Pacific Forum for Sustainable Development and the Commission in 2022 with clear and compelling messages from the Pacific on COVID-19 recovery and the climate emergency. In closing, may I suggest 3 messages. First, there is the need to action the IPCC report with the greatest of urgency and ambition. And ambition not just in terms of the technical issues and in terms of the economics of it, but ambition in terms of the ethical and moral requirements for us, in order for us to meet this challenge. The second message is that the drastic cuts to greenhouse gas emissions needed to keep the 1.5 degrees target alive should be the main consideration for inclusive and green recovery and economies. And that is simply to try and guard against possible moral corruption in some of the development activities that we engage in, that we may be, putting them forward as green when in fact they are not green. So just to be on the safe side, we need to make sure that we are keeping the 1.5 degree target alive requires us to make sure that main consideration for inclusive and green recovery and economies has got to be the main consideration. And the third message is we can do much within our mandates and processes, including under the UN Office for South-South Cooperation and ESCAP, to ensure that COVID-19 recovery and sustainable development has the strongest focus possible on the climate crisis and on what is needed to keep the Paris Agreement alive and the 2030 agenda. There is a saying that you keep an island alive and you keep the world alive. I think it's time to say that you keep the Paris Agreement alive and you keep this 2030 agenda alive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayava, for your also, again, comprehensive reflections. And I definitely see that the pivotal role that your regional office plays in supporting the Pacific Islands member states. And particularly you mentioned about your important role for intergovernmental participation, supporting participation, also facilitating regional approaches. And again, and also through your platform, Pacific Islands Sustainable Development Forum, to cover various items that are required for the actions to be taken. And then also, you rightly pointed out the challenges of sea level rise is imminent issues, and also the impact to the economic sector, like the ocean warming directly contributing to fisheries, and also the bleaching of corals. That is again imminent issue as well. And I think you have mentioned a very strong message which should be taken to the plenary as well, is that the actions anyway should be taken on the basis of moral imperative. And that's the clear message that we take. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayava, for your intervention. And now, moving on to the next panelist. Thank you for waiting. Ms. Ofa Masi Kaisami. Should I call you Ofa?
Yes, please.
Thank you. And correct me if I pronounce your name correctly. And I would like to throw a same set of questions to you in terms of your role in climate change and your reflections of challenges and opportunities that you see in your region. And I think you have a presentation material, so I'd like to pass the floor to you to share. So Ofa, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Kolchi. And let me first acknowledge the organizers of this forum, the UN South-South Cooperation, UNDP, and also ESCAP. Thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to present on the Pacific Climate Change Center, which is hosted here at the Secretariat of the Pacific Regional Environment Program, or otherwise known as PREP in Apia, Samoa. Ladies and gentlemen, today I will be sharing a bit of the work that we do from the Pacific Climate Change Center in contribution to building resilience, enhancing climate change resilience in the Pacific. But before we get to that, let me just take you through very briefly on the Pacific Climate Change Center and what we do from Apia, Samoa. The Pacific Climate Change Center is fairly new. It's 2 years in operation with a team that has been operated for less than a year. I can assure you that the Pacific Climate Change Center was aspired to be the center of excellence for climate information, for knowledge brokerage, training on climate change, and also the center is underpinned by strong partnerships with Pacific governments, applied research institutions, donors, and of course, the private sector. The Pacific Climate Change Center is also a trusted source of user-friendly, scientifically robust information. One of the key core functions of the center is innovation and applied research. So we aspire to be the center that provides user-friendly, scientifically robust information to our member countries. We are here to lead the better decision-making and innovative products, which are increasing resilience in the Pacific. In terms of our functions, as I mentioned, we have 4 core key functions. And of course, with our key functions, we also align with the green development concept of environmental responsiveness, resource efficiency, and community and cultural sensitivity. For the key functions of the center, next slide, please. The Center for Knowledge Brokerage, and that is including, we are here to build partnerships between the providers and users of climate change information. We are also aspire to improve access to scientifically robust information that is available to a wide range of audience at the right time, but also we want to produce these scientifically proven information in a format which our countries and our members can use. We're also here to ensure that high quality, practical and user-friendly information drives greater action on climate change. In terms of innovation, the Center is here to foster innovation and promote the development of new climate services and products. We're also here to hold challenge events to bring together those with the challenges with those with the solutions. So the Center is planning annual innovative platforms that we can host and showcase the solutions that can be used and are relevant to our Pacific countries. We also support the implementation of the Pacific Roadmap for Strengthened Climate Service, and I'm happy to say that we are also the host of the Pacific Med Desk. The Center is hosting the experts on meteorology from the Pacific Climate Change Center. In terms of applied research, we are also supporting research that are aligned to the needs of the Pacific communities. So we ensure that the research are relevant to addressing priorities, but also challenges in our Pacific countries. Under applied research as well, we are here to strengthen capacity to deliver research within the region and draw on regional and global research. Later on, I will be highlighting that the Center hosted the first IPCC Pacific webinar, which seen more than 320 participants joining from around the world, but also from the Pacific. And this is the way that the Center is connecting researchers around the Pacific with global and regional researchers. We're also here to support the implementation of the Pacific Climate Change Science Research Strategy, which was developed through SPREP, and now the Center is also spearheading the implementation of the Science Research Strategy in the Pacific. In terms of capacity building, we have a capacity building program which is funded through the Japan International Cooperation Agency. Next slide, please. And so these capacity building executive courses are offered online through our innovative e-learning platform, which was launched this year. From November 2019 to September 2021, which is this month, we've seen the increased momentum in our executive courses, and we've trained more than 300 participants, officials from the private sector, from government, but also from NGOs. They are the beneficiaries of our executive courses through our capacity building resilience program, which is funded by the Japan International Cooperation Agency in partnership with the government of Samoa. I just wanted to highlight that the executive courses are tailored and designed only for executive offices in government, in the private sector, but also NGOs. But other than that, we have other courses, which is the open learning courses, where any participant outside of government, but also students can actually enroll and take the course. And that comes under the open learning courses. We also have the Children's Corner, and these courses that are designed for students across the primary, secondary, and also tertiary level. And then, of course, we have our webinar session, which is open upon invitation from the Center. And this is one way of us contributing back to our member countries, but also building the resilience through our capacity building program here at the Pacific Climate Change Center. The use of the e-learning platform that I mentioned is that It will, we would like to call it an innovative e-learning platform because we have fostered partnerships through the innovative e-learning platform, and one of which is currently under discussion with the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation in order for us to mutually contribute to supporting innovation by use of the e-learning platform. As you can see from the graphs, the e-learning platform has also have features that we can use to analyze the participation, but also to connect to our participants. And the e-learning platform of the Pacific Climate Change Center, which has launched this year, has seen momentum in terms of requests from the countries. Right now, the countries have requested that we increase the number of nominations from 2 to 8. So, and that is a clear indication that the e-learning platform is gaining momentum in the Pacific. And this is one way of us contributing to the green growth development concept in the Pacific. Next slide, please. In terms of knowledge brokerage, the Pacific Climate Change Center is also hosting the Pacific Climate Change Portal. And this portal remains an essential tool to accessing information, but also in information knowledge management and knowledge brokerage. The Pacific Climate Change Center too, we want to ensure that the end users and people that are using the information must be at the forefront, but also the information are relevant and viewable on all type of devices. And this is the work that the Climate Change Center has been tasked to do, is that we want to ensure accessibility of those information, especially scientific reports. We want to ensure that they are translated in a language that the message are clear when used in, for example, decision-making, and also building resilience of our Pacific to climate change. In terms of applied research, like I mentioned, we hosted the first Pacific regional webinar on the IPCC Working Group 1, which I mentioned that we've seen the participation of more than 300 participants from around the Pacific, but also institutions from outside and universities. And this was done in collaboration with the Australian National Universities. So at this forum, we brought together the Pacific-based office of the IPCC Working Group 1 report. And we had a Talanoa session and also a panel discussion and a question and answer session. And we are also looking forward to hosting the next sort of series of training on the IPCC report. And I think it's quite timely because a lot of the participants are also delegates to COP26, which is going to happen in November. I just wanted to mention, sorry, just go back, Yvette. I just wanted to mention that we also have the space for the establishment of resident researchers in the Pacific. And we also want to establish a network of climate change researchers in the Pacific region. And we've, it's just because of the pandemic, otherwise we've got a lot of interest through the applied research work stream of the center. And we've got interest as well from institutions that wanted to partner with us in order for us to promote applied research and research that are relevant to addressing climate change and building resilience in the Pacific. In terms of South-South cooperation, this is something that that we have partnered up with the 5 Cs, the Climate Change Caribbean Center for Climate Change. And so there are areas for collaboration, and I've got them on the screen. We have a MOU with the 5 Cs, and the area for collaboration we identified in terms of developing tools to mainstream climate change adaptation and mitigation. We're also looking to share research, education, and training programs, and use of new information and communication technologies. And we also partner up to facilitate support and raise the profile of the Pacific Climate Change Portal and also the Caribbean Climate Change Portal. So this is something that we would like to partner with the 5 Cs, but also we can extend this, and it could be an area we can collaborate when with the UN Office for South-South Collaboration in terms of the South-South Galaxy and other mechanisms that you have in place. And sorry, the last one was we would like to also have joint projects. We are now working with the Climate Change Caribbean Center to look into areas where we can jointly put together a proposal and access funding resources and support. Like I mentioned, there is a draft MOU with the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation, and we have also identified potential synergies and area for collaboration, which includes triangular cooperation among common member states in the Pacific. We also like to promote knowledge sharing, scaling up and showcasing of development solutions through joint publications, events, workshops, and other forums. And we'd also, we identified that we would like to also collaborate to support research and capacity building initiatives on climate change resilience, island economic, ocean ecosystem, waste management, pollution control, and environmental governance. And of course, we would like to also explore other activities of mutual interest and benefit for the both organizations. Thank you very much. And that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Ofa, for once again for your comprehensive introduction of your PCCC. And I also associate with you. Until last year, I was also working on your sister organization of the Regional Capacity Building Platform in Southeast Asia. So very nice to see you really taking off activities. And like you said, you highlighted very important role of the regional organization, and not only for the political momentum building, but at the same time serving as a center of excellence to provide the scientifically robust data information that would be the basis for any policy formulation in the region. And that's quite critical. And thank you very much for your intervention. So initially I wanted to go another round of discussion, but the time is against us. So may I just do one additional round very quickly, and then sort of wrap up if you're okay with that. So I just wanted to hear each one of you. So what can be done more because we've seen the challenges, opportunities. So I just wanted to hear just one word. If you want to recommend your bosses, the policymakers, and the leadership, what can be done more to get to the impact that we want to see? Perhaps starting from Ofa, just a one sentence response.
Yeah. Thank you for that. For me, it would be capacity building and research. These are two areas that, speaking from experience with the work that we do, I think these are areas that we need to really collaborate on and build capacity building and training around the applied research and, of course, capacity building. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ofa. And then back to Mr. Mayava. Can you respond as well?
Yeah, thank you very much. I recognize that this is very much a kind of a personal reflection on my part, but I really do think that the problem is our philosophies and our ethics are not strong enough to be able to hold up the rights of the non-humans, for example, the rights of nature, and especially difficult to hold up the rights of future generations. We pay lip service to the future generations, but we don't consider them when we look at what we're doing. And I really do think that we need to expand our moral and ethical sort of notions and coverage so that we can cover nature and future generations much more meaningfully. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have this challenge of being just about ourselves.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Mayafa. And then Dr. Rahman, can you share with us your reflection? What can be done more?
Yes, can you pass the question to the other panelists, because Dr. Rahman just lost his connection. He's trying to get connected.
That's okay. And may I confirm the Secretariat, the Ambassador Mala is still around? If not, I'll just wrap up.
Fukuda-san, I think he's left.
Okay, great.
Okay.
All right, so in view of the interest of time, let me just sort of wrap up. So this morning, thank you very much for your participation. This morning, we are joined by the 4 distinguished panelists from different regional organization offices to discuss the topic of climate change and the green development. And we have to cover the topic of the roles of regional organization to take part in catalyzing national climate actions in the context of South-South cooperation, also perspective of sharing of views of challenges, opportunities, and also state of green development to some extent. And we have also received messages what can be done more to leverage the momentum, also actions on the ground. And some of the takeaway messages I hear is that among many other items, first of all, the COVID, despite the challenges in COVID, it is not an excuse for taking an action. We are to move on, and that's one thing. Another thing is from the Mr. Mayafa, that's quite strong a message also, is that ambition should be based on the moral imperative. And that's something as a strong signal that should be sent to the plenary as well as to the upcoming events as well. And also we see sort of opportunities for South-South cooperation, and regional organizations, as I understand, is best placed, and we confirm that, to forge partnership and including intergovernmental collaboration on political side, as well as the project formulation, and not to mention the capacity building and the applied research to provide a scientific, robust information to provide evidences for policymakers to make right decisions. And to conclude, in terms of the sort of role of regional organization, I just wanted to share one quote, which has also been discussed in a different meeting shared by ASEAN Secretariat as well, but I think still holds the relevant to all of you. So let me just state here, which is perhaps you hear that before, but if you want to walk fast, walk alone. But if you want to walk far, walk together. I think that's the underlying principle of the partnership and the South-South and triangular cooperation that we are to elaborate in the coming days. And this combat to climate change it's going to be a long-term fight, and for sure. So that we wish to continue to work together in the spirit of the collaboration partnership. And with that, I'd like to close this session. And please. Log off and perhaps take a few minutes of break and then come back to the plenary. So let me just once again join me the round of applause to all the distinguished panelists for excellent contributions. Okay, thank you very much, and very good morning, afternoon to you. So microphone back to Secretariat.